Hey, this week Lorusso and Steve Hoffman join me to talk about Percona, the open source database solutions company that after all this has managed to keep open source. We talk about how and why you don't want to miss it, so stay tuned. This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 799, recorded September 3rd, still open source at Percona. It is time for FLOSS Weekly. That's the show about free, Libre, and open source software. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and today we're talking about Percona. It's an open source database software, and it seems like anymore it's one of the few big open source database solutions that's still actually open source. Goodness. I think we're going to talk about that just a little bit during the show today. I don't know much about Percona. I kind of have to admit my database experience is sort of just like MySQL and SQLite and a tiny bit of fighting against Microsoft SQL. It's been something. Because of things happening outside of our control, I am the host and co-host today, so that's going to be just a little bit different, but we've done it that way before. It's not going to be a big deal. But let me go ahead and bring our guests on today, and we've got Lorusso and Steve Hoffman, and we talked a little bit before the show, and Lori, you are the community manager, and Steve is sort of one of the VPs of technical. Is that about the way that lays?
Yeah, so just my name's Lori Lorusso, like Karate Kid Lorusso, and yeah, I'm head of community at Percona, and yeah.
Yeah, and I'm one of the engineering managers or engineering leads here for Percona, run the development side of the house. So
okay.
Lori and I are joined at the hip.
I understand. I know how that goes. So let's talk for just a minute about, I guess the technical side is where we'll start. And what is Percona? Like, how is it different than, MariaDB or any of the other database solutions that out there? What's the kind of the thing that makes the difference about Percona?
So it's not wildly different than MariaDB's original model. We both took a fork of MySQL and, added our own features to it. What we think, was the answer to the needs of the market, from an enterprise standpoint. We've also since done that with MongoDB, and we're also working in the Postgres space as well to bring new features on top of an already great base. So in that sense, not wildly different. I think you could say we're similar there, but then I think we go a lot further than them. So we also have our operators product. We also do our monitoring and management suite. So maybe we have a wider portfolio, but I think it's fair to say MariaDB model is similar to Percona.
Okay.
And so this is where, let me just jump in. This is where I think Steve is being humble, and that's why you have a community person to back him up. So, I think what you're missing is the innovation, right? So we have community editions of MySQL, of Postgres, but what we do is we make them better, and we're open source. So we take the regular edition, we open source it, and we add in our little spice to make it better for users.
Mm-hmm. So is Percona a database, or is Percona a database company, or is it both?
We like to call ourselves a solutions company. Okay. We produce database software, and you can get it in all different formats, but we make the majority of our money on the services that we provide. But when you take our software and our services and sort of smash them together, you get sort of the overarching Percona solution. Okay. You don't have to use both, but I think that's where you get the best value is our software with our services. We can help you run it better than anybody else. But if you're using, let's say, a community edition of either Mongo or Postgres or MySQL, we can still service you, but it's just you don't get the full value.
Okay, and as you work on some of these pieces of software, I'm sure. So you make software changes to them. You make changes to the source code because it's source available without being an open source. Do any of those changes ever get pushed back up to the original project, or do they kind of all stay siloed in your? I mean, obviously it's open source, but still, there can be either an effort or not an effort made to push them up.
Yeah, I mean, we like to contribute everything that we do. Now, we have learned over the years that certain things aren't really necessarily welcome or valuable back upstream. In many cases, we're actually building enterprise features that already exist in the upstream's enterprise product. So us contributing that back up there, they don't want that. But we do bug fixes, we do, extensions and enhancements all the time. And again, we do it all, make it as open as humanly possible, direct contributions, and hope that we get it included in upstream so that it just everybody gets to benefit from the change.
Yeah, I mean every change that you can make upstream is just one fewer change for you guys to have to be the stewards of. That makes sense. That's kind of interesting that you're re-adding some of the enterprise features that have been not added intentionally. Is there any animosity from any of the upstream vendors because of that?
I think on the community side, there's no animosity. I can't even say that I'm aware of it on the enterprise side. I'm sure, if Percona got way too big, people that haven't taken notice certainly would. But we seem to have a great relationship with the MySQL community, certainly the Postgres community and Mongo. I don't think we have each other as adversaries. Business-wise, surely we're competitors, but I don't think I've not received any death threats. I don't think anybody on the team has, so we're in good standing there.
You managed to remain friendly competitors. That is handy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fun. Well, but the database world seems to be sort of cutthroat these days. We talked just a little bit before the show about like all of the different licensing changes that have happened and forks because of it, and it seems like. Well, no, I know one thing that has happened is you'll have a company that they have a database, like they have their secret sauce in their database, but instead of making it all secret, they've made it open source. And so they've got this database code that they work on, and then they also offer it as a service. And like that's great until Amazon comes along and says, it's open source. We can offer this as a service too. And suddenly this business that does open source, like their revenue stream starts to dry up. And they immediately go, we've got to make some kind of change to be able to keep making money. And it seems like in a lot of cases, the change they make is we're going to use a business source license of some sort. And it fractures the community. It inevitably results in a fork. Like Redis and Valkey. We now have Valkey because Redis did the exact same thing. And they in their wisdom, they made this decision and they made the announcement to move away from an open source license with Redis during I think a Kubernetes conference. And so there were a bunch of people that were using Redis all together in the same place when this was announced. And apparently by the end of the conference, they sort of walked away going, yeah, we have a gentleman's agreement to make a fork and call it, all get on board with the same fork. It's gotta be cutthroat. Is it a cutthroat environment? Have you seen that?
Let me take your Amazon example. For one. And I think that's where you come up with strategic alliances, right? That's where you really work within, it's a cloud company, right? It's a hyperscaler. So if they can, that's what the marketplace is for. If they can package up what we do and add it to what they're doing, I think that's a win for both, right? So the way that we treat our core customers, the level of service that we provide is super unique. So to have a place for us a platform for us to list out like our version of MySQL or Postgres, I think it's a win for both. And then when you think about how the community kind of rallies around, open source and wanting to keep things open, I think for me, the biggest shift I saw was when Terraform went closed and there was a manifesto. The community was so irate that they came up with a manifesto. And then from the manifesto, like they ended up, the name of the project now is Open Tofu, but it started, I think it was OpenTF, and it's underneath the Linux Foundation, just like Valkey is now underneath the Linux Foundation. And I think when you have something that's open, that people use it and adopt it because it's open, and they build their businesses off of it because it was open, and then you close it.
Yeah.
then you have like this big community uprising, specifically if it's something so popular like Terraform or Redis. And to be a company, to work for an open source company like Percona that is there to carry the open source flag and say, okay, so Redis closed source, guess what? We're going to be a part of Valky. Like we're the only ones that offer, like on-prem support for that. And in that, look at the other companies that have joined Valky. You've got your AWS, you've got your Google, you've got your Oracle. So it's like all of us working together to have a piece of this pie, if you will, in open source land. I think it's really awesome to be a part of a company that supports open source, that it's that core to who we are.
And so is it fair to say that Percona's business model is not simply hosting databases for companies? There's more to it than that?
Yeah, that's perfectly fair to say.
What's
our model is actually you hosting your own database. So we give you the software that lets you run it on whatever your infrastructure is. So if you want to run it on-prem, if you want to run it in the cloud, if you want to run it across multiple clouds, we actively support and test all of those scenarios. That's given the power to the people.
Yeah.
And I think what we do is we help you level up. Right. So we have not only the innovations that are coming out of engineering, but we have the experts in our support and our managed services. So if you are trying to elevate, if you are trying to do something and you realize you don't have the staff or the support in-house, that's where we come in. So having that like hand to hold you through a migration or to help you tune your database so that you're getting the best results, to take your database and put it on the cloud with our new product, Everest, like, just because we're open source doesn't mean, that we are a less than. We are actually like a plus.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree with that. I think part of the problem is that so many companies, they love the open source model, but they've not really figured out how that model actually ties into their business model in a way that makes sense. And sometimes they end up sabotaging themselves. And it sounds like Percona has managed to avoid that, so that's good. That's a good thing. That's a good sign for the future.
We just celebrated 18 years.
Oh wow!
Right, Steve?
Yep. 18th birthday. We became an adult. Percona can now legally
drink and vote.
Do what 18-year-olds do. Yeah. Well, just different in every country, as we learned. We did a poll internally about turning 18. It was like, wow, it's amazing. Globally, 18 means so many different things around the world. But that was a lot of fun.
What was the beginning of the company? What was the first thing that Percona did? Was it literally MySQL stuff?
MySQL phone support. Yep.
Phone support, really? Mm-hmm. So
that's our co-founders were actively taking calls from customers to help optimize their databases. So they were a consulting company. So if you think about Percona, it's Percon Performance Consultants, and .com was taken. So percona.com came to be. So little trivia history on our name. But yes, Peter and Vadim took many phone calls. I don't know the exact date, but we have a book that they put out at about the 14-year mark, or maybe it was the 13-year mark. That said, like, up until at the time, 8 or so years ago, they were actively taking phone calls from customers who were having performance issues. Fortunately, we have enough staff. We have smart enough people that they don't have to anymore. But that's how we got our start.
Oh, that's great. That's a lot of fun. And so what's the portfolio now? What are the different databases that you guys will still take support calls for?
Yeah. I mean, we're active. Like I said, MySQL is what most people know us for. MongoDB probably second, but then we're very active in the Postgres space and getting more so every day. And then from there, where you choose to run it, we support, like I said, on-prem, bare metal installations, cloud installations. We create operators now, so you can run this in Kubernetes. So in your orchestrated environments, which we're seeing a ton of traction there. We're now releasing, if you think of Amazon's RDS is sort of like database as a service, point, click, get a database. We have an on-prem equivalent to that in our Everest product. So it still uses Kubernetes and operators underneath, but it gives you that single API that you can call and wire into your CI/CD or turn over to your developers and let them point, click, and create databases, as opposed to having to know all the behind the scenes commands.
And you forgot Valky. So Valky's our latest database that we're going to support.
Yeah, in Valky we only support it. We don't actually build our own version of it. We contribute to it. We're active in that Valky community, but there's not like a Percona fork of Valky. We're trying to support that community, not compete with them by any stretch.
Right. And so I'm sure you could imagine a future where you have a slightly different take on something, and you do end up having an in-house Valky fork. But I'm sure try to avoid that if possible, right?
Yeah. I can't imagine that future. I
Really?
don't see it.
Oh.
I don't ever see it as good, right? Like, I mean, if we're really community, right? Like, and we mean it, we find a way not to fork. Now, I can't fault any of the projects that have had to go their separate ways. I know there were certainly valid reasons, some of them personal, some of them technical, some of them vision, but I don't know that that's always the best outcome. So for me, that's like the last thing. If we've hit that, hopefully we've exhausted all options, because to take a thriving community and to effectively split it in half, it's going to slow innovation down, right? And that's one of the beauties of open source, is just how fast we can innovate when all of us are focused on the same thing. So again, I'm preaching here. This is just my personal belief, but yeah, I don't love that, direct competition with each other. If we Percona fork, first and foremost, we want it to be to help innovate and add back to the community. But in some cases, when that takes its turn, like, for us, we do have a fork of MySQL. Oracle Enterprise isn't going to accept our LDAP authentication. They have their own, right? They don't need us, but we do feel that it's good to bring to the community. So I think, like I said, we do it for a slightly different purpose.
And so, for example, we've talked about Everest a couple of times. So that's fully open source. If somebody wants to just host their own version of Everest and not have to pay you guys anything for the contract, that's out there as an option. And then your business model is essentially, this is a complicated thing to do. We suspect that eventually some of these businesses are going to want to have support for it.
Yeah. I mean, that's been our model, is if you've got the manpower, the time, and the talent to do it yourself, our software is free and open source. If you don't, we can certainly help with that. That's been our model, and that's fortunate for us that our business model has been successful enough that we've been a continually growing and continually profitable company since the beginning.
Yeah, well, so I mean, that business model has worked for other companies over the years. That's essentially what Red Hat was founded on, and it grew them to be $1 billion business. So there's definitely nothing wrong with that, and that is proven out to be a winner, in many industries at least. Yeah, that's very neat. So I'm curious. In addition to that, do you ever get someone call you up and say, hey, it would be great if MySQL did this. It would be great if Postgres had this feature. Can you give us a quote on adding that to the code base? Does that happen?
That's only on the days that end in Y. Yeah, we get that a lot. Like, every customer has a unique need. That this is the way our business works. We need this feature, and we have a product team that does the evaluation. Is this solving a problem exclusively for you, or is this a problem that many people are experiencing, and by creating it we can benefit the broader community? So we try to stay on that community-based side, where we're looking for large swaths that would be impacted for the products. And that's not to say that we don't do some custom stuff. We have some customers that have specific needs. If the ask isn't huge, we put it in there, and there's a monetization model for that.
I mean, sure.
But I think that is the value of having community live under engineering as well, right? It's this feedback loop. So as many customers as we have, as many conferences as we go to, being able to have the pulse of whatever community we're in. If it's like an all things open, it's just a general open source, conference. But if it's a PG conf, we can really focus our attention to that particular language, that particular database, and really work within that sort of feedback loop. What are we doing well? What are we missing out on? Like, here is a talk that we're giving that talks about why we decided to do this, and I think that's where community wins, right? Again, Percona being an open source company, community has always been at the forefront of what we do. And then being able to really zero in on the events that we go to, and having a forum where you get answers, having a very good resources within Percona to give that knowledge out to the community is a win-win.
Yeah. And so that does kind of lead on to another question about that community effort. What does it look like as far as in these places where you guys are the source code, like you have your own repos for this? Do you get a lot of patches and work from the community, or is it pretty much just a one-way street where you guys do the work in the community or you're out there using it?
I mean, I can tell you, we get a ton of contributions, and community contributions don't always come in the form of long lines of thousands of code changes. Sometimes it's improving our documentation. Sometimes
Absolutely.
we get a lot of community give back on our forums where they'll come in and answer questions for the masses, like, how do I set this up? How do I use it? I'm getting this error. So we're very, very active on that front. That's one of the things that shocked me. I don't come from open source like, way back when. This is something within the last 5 years for me, but seeing how active our communities are is the exciting part, because number one, that the entire burden doesn't fall to us, because I think if it did, and maybe this is where some companies go wrong, is the community's not paying your bills, so you tend to favor the ones that are, but because we have such an active community, it allows us to work together and accept code contributions, accept documentation updates, accept answers on the forums, things like that.
Are there any rough spots? So I'll give you the background to what I'm thinking here. I'm part of an open source project, and we just recently got sort of called out in our one of our places where people can ask questions, one of our forums, of essentially, you guys made this big change and you didn't ask us about it first. And it's been a little bit of a thing, because like there's a couple of ways you can look at this. For one thing, almost every open source project is a meritocracy to some extent. And so one of the answers that we give is, if you guys would like to see changes, come write source code, come be a part of Discord where the developers are talking, so that you can give feedback. But it's really become a little bit of a source of friction. And there's been some other things going on, but not important. Of course, it's always more complicated. But I'm just curious, have you guys had any of that kind of friction, and how have you solved it?
We have our own forms of it. I don't think we've seen that specifically, but with for the products that we are in control, like PMM, Percona monitoring and management, we don't have an upstream necessarily beholden to. I mean, we do have a copy of Grafana in there that we base it on, but by and large, we're driving the roadmap. And a couple of times we'll deprecate a feature, or we'll put something in that ends up not catching on, and so we sort of abandon it or start pulling it out. And so we definitely hear about it. But I think
it's impossible to deprecate a feature without someone coming along and saying,
yeah,
that was part of my workflow. It's the XKCD comic about holding down the spacebar, heating up your CPU. That was part of my workflow. Put it back.
Yeah. We get that, right? Like, but you realize we took that out because there's a better way to accomplish this.
Right.
And so most of the time we luck out with, sort of a re-education on it. We didn't take something away without giving you something back. Here's why. And, it hasn't ended sourly. I can't say that people are like, oh, thank you for that. But they at least walk away with an understanding of, like, there was a rationale behind it. It wasn't, who can we piss off today?
Okay,
well, and also I think it's a matter of communication, right?
Yes.
Like, it's a matter of giving people warning, letting them know what's going on, being able to have, I don't want to say standard talking points, but those standard talking points is to, like, this is why we did it. And because you don't want to detract from the end reason, right? Which is maybe there's a better way, or when we actually looked at our logs, nobody's using this in terms of, like, grand scheme of things. So having a good communication, and like Steve said, like, having the forum as a place where people can converse, being able to kind of contribute back, submit issues, that I think is key to keeping the community safeguarded from some detractors. It's always the small group can sometimes make the loudest noise, but when you're just very transparent, like in the whole methodology of being open source, I think you end up just winning long term.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Lori, to speak to this next, because sometimes the community people can be on the other side of the fence from engineering, and if there's not decent communication between those two teams, they can be actually working at cross purposes. What kind of things do you guys do to make sure that doesn't happen? To make sure that the community team, so this is something that just recently happened to us. The community team got surprised by a change that the engineering team made, and it's like, oh, that's got to be a bug. We're sure to get that fixed. And then the engineering guy is like, that wasn't a bug. That was an intentional change. Like, please tell us about these things. How do you avoid that?
Well, I love that my dog just started barking, so I apologize.
Triggered the dog on that one.
Has input.
Yeah, too much in the background. But I'm very happy to say that at Percona, community has moved under engineering. At other companies that I've been to, community's always fallen under marketing. And that's where you get the disconnect, right? Because marketing has marketing objectives and engineering has their objectives. And when there isn't open flow communication across the board, then you have those issues where you're like, wait, I'm presenting the wrong version of something, or I didn't see the release notes, nobody told me. And it's a communication issue. And so I know, don't laugh. She's old, she's 14. She doesn't know what's happening. She's just like, why is mommy talking to a computer? So now that community has moved under engineering, it's so much better because we are on all of the product updates. We are looking at the roadmap. We are making sure that we are dropping breadcrumbs to innovations that are going to come out in like 4 or 6 months, right? We're letting the community know like why we're thinking the way that we're thinking, what our engineers are doing. And then with that, we have surveys that are just product-led surveys that are just like, we want to know what version you're using. What is this? Like, how is this working out for you? Like, what can we do? And so keeping a really tight feedback loop like that is where I think community and engineering can just sing. So it's been night and day from previous companies to be under the engineering org and showing them our value, right? Like our tech team, our tech evangelists, our developers, our engineers, like they have like the history within their own career of touching source code, of building things, of doing testing and doing that kind of stuff. So we're also working to embed them more within engineering itself, like to be the ones that are helping to contribute, that are looking at pull requests, things like that. So that I think is like, it's new for us and we're just kind of testing it out, but I'm very excited because the tech teams are like my tech evangelists are very excited to get their hands dirty. Nobody wants to be a showpiece. Like you want to be able to actually demo what's going on. You want to be able to speak from engineering and say, this is why we're doing things. And that's what we're working on right now. And I think it's going to go really well.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Steve, what does that look like from, as I say, again, your side of the fence, trying to bring your evangelists in and let them work with the code? Has that gone well?
Oh my God. Yeah. It's better than you can imagine. Like it typically, I would say, we rely on community for the voice of the non-paying user because we don't really have too many other avenues for that. And if you're not careful, your entire roadmap becomes the customer roadmap. So getting that continuous line of feedback from them, of what does the community want is awesome. And then even more so that they can be so hands-on. And again, it takes all different forms. It's not purely contributing lines of code. Sometimes it's using it. Sometimes it's, hey, I couldn't talk about this at the next conference. This is too clunky. This needs some polish. And this is how I think it should look. So, the forms of feedback take all different forms, but they are wildly valuable. You didn't realize just how much you missed it until you start getting it. You're like, wow, where would we be if we had thought of this so much sooner?
Yeah.
Like Lori said, it's been a not fairly recent change, measured in 6 months or so, 5 months, something like that. But it's been a great change and we're just keep building on it. So I'm excited to see it continue.
So is the next iteration of this to make sure that the marketing people know the source code too?
We might be asking too much there. I don't know that they have an interest in learning the source code. At least the tech evangelists have an interest in it. And I'm not faulting the marketing folks. Don't ask me to design anything that looks catchy. I'm not a creative.
I get that. I know I've heard stories of, marketing people coming and asking just the most off the wall questions. Like, could it be possible for us to do this? And, engineering goes, I guess it's technically possible, and then a couple months later, you see the latest marketing thing. This new feature coming soon.
Yes, that happens everywhere. That's every job I've ever been at. That happens. That has nothing to do with open source, though. That's just human nature.
So it's the marketing guys just trying to grab onto something new and flashy to put in.
Yep.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so let's see. What does I'm curious, what does this look like then? So if you get somebody from the community that says, "Hey, I've got this great idea," but they're not a paying customer, but you look at it and go, like, that's legitimately could be useful for people. Like, what does a decision matrix look like for this? To are we going to put some resources into making that happen?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to speak for my product counterparts. But one of their big value adds is really assessing the overall market need. And it's not just, take your idea at face value. Is there enough people that might buy this? That makes the decision. But is there enough of an idea in your suggestion that might be able to expand it or might be able to take it in a different direction? Maybe sometimes even narrow it. And that helps us get to hey, we're onto something here. There's a legitimate market need. And again, we do partner with the community team to make sure that we do vet those ideas before we just run right out and build it, because Lord knows that's expensive. But hey, we're thinking of this thing. We got the feedback. It seems to be valuable. Let's talk about it at the next pick your conference, and see what the feedback is. If it's positive, if we hint that, hey, we're thinking about doing this, and the feedback is, oh my God, yeah, that'd be awesome, then it just starts moving up and up the list. I think the biggest thing is giving that community a voice and then listening to it, not just, here's a form you can fill out and, black hole it.
Right.
I think one of the things, that I think that we're missing from this conversation that I'm happy to bring in is not just Percona related community, but community in general. So Steve is my guinea pig, and I'm so happy to have to be on this podcast with you. And one of the communities that we are a part of is FLOSS. And so FLOSS is the financial arm of the Linux Foundation. And one of the things, I was sitting on a call, that they were looking for is contributions to one of their projects. It's the something control. I can't remember. It's 3 C's. It's CCC. I'm terrible. Yeah. But basically, they need help with expertise. And so Steve, I was like, I voluntold him that he needed to help me. And now we're contributing our sort of reference architecture for MySQL in terms of having a hardened security features for MySQL, things you should look out for. And so it's not just talking to ourselves or talking to our own community. It's how can we impact the broader community with our expertise. And there's another project that we're working on. It's called Guac. It's in the OpenSSF, so it's a security project. Guac is being built in Postgres. One of my contacts was like, hey, you work for Percona now. We need help with Postgres. We wanted to keep this open source project completely open. Can you help us? And it's like, yes, of course we can. So we are now looking at their database as they're building out this security project. So it's not just working within our own sort of Percona mindset. It's what can we do at Percona to really elevate the community in general. So it's a really exciting time to be at Percona, because we are sort of flexing our skill set in other communities that maybe we haven't approached, because it's not just the database, right? It's how does the database make your project better? And so I think, the next thing you think about is AI, right? And so there's all of these tools that are coming out. And for us, we don't want to be the next greatest AI tool, but hey, what are you building out of? You're building out of your database. Do you want to make sure that you are fine tuning your database, that you're getting out of it what you need? So again, it's sort of we are vastly more than just talking to ourselves, which I think is what sets us apart.
That's an interesting point, because Steve and I, we've been talking a lot about the community upwards to your upstream vendors and the community downwards to your users. And Lori comes and just brings along this idea of, well, what about talking about the community outwards to sort of our peers and the other people doing interesting things? And that's something that we don't think about quite as much, and that is really interesting. And so, what is the what's kind of the motivating factor to want to reach out and work in some of those kind of vertical directions? Excuse me, horizontal directions.
Well, I think, again, it's like everybody has to store their projects somewhere. Mm-hmm. And if we can lend a hand in making your project successful, I mean, that is the value of open source, right? It's people coming together to build something, to innovate on it, and to make it better, to solve whatever problem. So for Guac, it's an SBOM problem. And where Percona might not really be interested in solving like SBOMs, like your supply, build, and material, if we can say, hey, in building Guac, if you do this to your database, it makes it cleaner, it makes it better, then at the end of the day, your project will be better. Your project will be more successful. That, I think, again, is the value of going to these other communities and showing what you do and how you can do it better. And when you think about foundations, like look who's involved in foundations. You've got your Googles, your Amazons, your Azures, you've got your Facebooks, you got your Fidelities, you've got Citibank, you've got all of these massive companies, like what is it, 90-something% of enterprise companies use open source components. So why wouldn't we want to share the love across the board with foundations that we're a part of?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, do you find that your community people have to sometimes do some translation work for your engineering team? And so what comes to mind with this is I do a little bit of small business IT for very small businesses around town. And sometimes they'll come to me with the strangest asks. Like, I need a computer with, and they'll say something that they saw from a magazine or on an ad somewhere. Like, I need a computer that has one of those new NVIDIA workstation graphics cards. I'm like, you're a sprinkler system. You put lawn sprinklers in. What? And then, so then there's this, okay, so what are you trying to accomplish? And then they'll tell me, and it's like, oh, you don't need one of those really expensive GPUs. You need a new desktop with a new processor and a GPU in it that'll run something with CUDA. And then you can use your Blueprint software. And so there's this kind of translation issue where they know what they want, but they're trying to tell you like the details of it, and they don't understand the details. And I have to imagine that in the database world, working with customers, and even some on this working with other foundations, that this sort of thing happens too. Well, we need a database, and I don't even know databases well enough to tell you the sort of off the wall things. I'm sure you guys get it though. People ask for off the wall things, and it's like, well, let's help you actually come up with what you really need.
If we're lucky, we can hear what they're truly asking for. That's if we're lucky. We do rely a lot on the community team, the product team, our customer success team, some of our services engineers. Like, they are masters at hearing the problem under the problem that's being described.
Right.
If we're unlucky, we just start building based on, I need this NVIDIA thing,
Yeah.
And that's happened once or twice, more than I care to admit.
I'm sure.
I think then we circle back like, okay, how do we miss this? How do we get this out next time so that we're not just, sort of chasing fantasies, but actually like getting to the core of the problem? Because there's nothing worse when you build the exact thing that you were asked to build, turn it over, and they're like, it didn't fix my problem. Like, what was the problem? Like, maybe we should have started there instead of just building the solution. But
yes. Yeah.
And I love it because it all comes down to communication, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there have been many times, and like Steve can tell you, where I've dragged somebody from engineering on a call with me, right? Talking about community stuff and people asking for things that I have no idea. Like, I'm a marketing person, right? Like, I am not technical. I can try and translate to a point. But I need to pull someone in to be like, what exactly are they saying? Like, and then, and then also like being able to take a step back to be able to stop a conversation conversation and say, okay, hold on. Like, let's talk about part A. You've just went from A to Z. Like, let's just figure out what A is. And I think when you have a good team involved, right? When you have someone that can maybe take the marketing fluff and drill it down to the actual ask, and then you have the engineer that can take the actual technical side of things and put it together, you're gonna win. But when, to Steve's point, when you just do one or the other, you could build something that's not necessary. And nobody wants that.
Yeah. Do you get this with pull requests as well? I'm sure you must from time to time.
Usually you get yes, it is very, very specific to their problem. Doesn't take into consideration how anybody else uses the feature. But believe it or not, it's less frequent than you might think. More often than not, you get a very flexible contribution that's like, this solves only my problem, but it makes extra effort not to step on anything else as a result. So those are the ones that we appreciate. But even the ones that are purely self-serving, we'll try to kick it back and say, hey, is there a way to do this a little bit more friendly to the other people that actually do want this to happen? Can we improve the error messages or the return codes or whatever the case may be? So we try to, don't want to tell somebody, thanks, but no, don't ever come back. So it's always to keep the conversation going. I mean, it takes an awful lot from someone to be willing to contribute code, and databases, they're not easy. So if you find someone giving you database code, there's someone you want a relationship with. So we do our best to keep that going.
Yes. It seems like databases and compilers are two of the really hairy problems in modern code.
Not for the faint of heart.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, probably a question for Lori then. Have you guys had any real pain points beyond what we've talked about with trying to wrangle the community? I know sometimes there's things that come up that are just not pleasant to deal with.
So not since I have been at Percona, but I used to be the CDF Continuous Delivery Foundation outreach chair. And in that it was kind of there was a wonky time. Like, they lost their executive director, they got a new one. Community didn't understand what was happening within the organization, and the way that and there's 8 projects under the CDF, and the projects were wondering what was going on. And so what I did was I held feedback sessions where I just let them tell me everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. There was lots of ugly. And it all stemmed from miscommunication or lack of communication and not understanding what was going on. And from that, creating an actual action plan moving forward, having everybody buy into it because they saw bits and pieces of the conversations that they had within the plan itself. Yeah. And then launching the plan and holding yourself accountable to the things that you said that you were going to do. And the change from when I started in June of 2022 to we had CDCon in May of 23 or April of 23, whatever it was phenomenal, because everybody felt like they were a piece of the CDF, whether they were a project, whether they were a contributor, whether they were someone that just happened to use one of our projects, a user, someone that adopted it. It was amazing. And I think that is where community can really shine, is when you do take a step back and say, okay, this isn't working. How can we make this work? How can we fix this? And if it is sitting there listening, I had very many calls, and the CDF is a volunteer position. So sitting there knowing that people are going to rag on you for an hour at a time, telling you how you're not good, you're not good enough, you're not doing what you said, it takes a toll, but it also, I think, is inspiring, because it makes you want to do the things that the mission statement says. Mm-hmm. You chose to be at this foundation for a reason, right? You chose to use this project for a reason. We need to be beholden to why you made that decision. We need to hold true to our core values as to why we're doing this in the first place. So it hasn't happened at Percona. I mean, I'm new, but I think, again, the way that coming in from an outsider looking in, right, from a marketing person that's always been community to a community person inside of engineering, it's really awesome to see the innovation from our engineers, the feedback from the community, the amount of push and pull that is all positive. It's really cool. So happily haven't had to deal with anything like that. But again, coming from the CDF, it was just a matter of letting people's voices be heard, and then creating an action plan, and then being accountable for what you said you're going to do.
Yeah. So I want to let Steve answer that if he wants to, and then I have a follow-up for Lori, because this is fascinating.
No, I can't recall an instance like that where there was just an upheaval. I think I think we're very cognizant of how you treat the community. You asked earlier about, how do you can't just be in your own little community. You can't expect everybody to come contribute to you. So we have to, that's why we share our expertise outward. So I think because we're very, very aware of that, maybe that's helped us dodge some bullets. But I can't remember my 5 years here, any ever being sort of thrown at us. I don't think it's luck. I think it's, we're very intentional about how we get involved in the various communities, either the ones that we depend on, our own, or the ones that we join to our sides.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so Lori, let me follow up on that with this question. When you have those conversations with community and you do come to the conclusion that there's in the organization, the broader organization, there is something that we've done here that maybe it needs a course correction. How do you get buy-in from those in the organization to convince them that there needs to be a course correction? Like, that seems like that could be the hardest part here. How does that work? Do you have any secrets for us?
So this is actually funny. So when I first started with the CDF, I had a nail in my tire, and I had a meeting with the core team from the Linux Foundation that worked on the CDF, and I didn't know that the new executive director was going to be on the call. So I'm at a tire place with my hoodie on, my headphones, like looking very much like hacker crazy.
That's great.
And not realizing who was on the call with me. I just kind of stated everything. I was like, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. And this is how I see a pathway forward. And without realizing that the executive director was on, he's like, yes. And so I think it's being able to justify the actions that you want to take, having an actual plan and a strategy. And it wasn't just like, I want to listen to a bunch of feedback. It was, I want to listen to a bunch of feedback. From that feedback, I want to create our plan of action. From that plan of action, I want to present it to everybody to get buy-in. From that buy-in, then we're going to go. And it's having the overall strategy and then presenting it, right? Because if he had said no, like, I don't want you to do that, I would have said, okay, what is your suggestion? Yeah. And then I'm going to go back to what mine is, or maybe I will alter it and include his pieces. I tend to steamroll. I can't help it. But again, it's all about like opening the communication, but also having the information to back up what you're saying. Like, I was a part of that organization for a year. I was one of the people complaining, which is why I stood up and ran for outreach chair, right? Because I was like, I cannot stand to be in another one of these meetings again. This has been terrible. We want to do something and nothing is happening. I guess I will stand up and I will do more. And I think that's also what makes community great, right? Is that everybody comes to the table and it's up to you to decide like how much you want to put in. Like, do you want to be a chair? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to be on a program committee? Do you want to initiate, do you want to go to GitHub and say, here's an issue? Like, do you want to give feedback, right? Like, community is only as strong as you make it. And it's up to the individuals to kind of take that leap. Like, you can use a project all you want and never say anything, and you can be upset that things aren't working the way you want it to, or you can have ideas, but if you don't share them, if you don't bring yourself to the table, then they're not going to be heard. So I think, again, for me, it always comes down to like open communication, feedback, like listening to others, and then using that to strategize on how you move forward.
Yeah, excellent. All right. We have been going for just over 50 minutes. I'm curious, is there something that we haven't talked about that is just burning that you guys really want to talk about? And this is sort of a different question, difficult question, because you have to go through all the things I wanted to talk about and which of those have we checked off. But is there anything that we have not gotten to that you really wanted to?
I mean, there's a couple of items in the roadmap. Maybe I could assign a few Jira tickets to you if you wouldn't mind just throwing some code down for me.
I can write code, but man, databases is just outside of my expertise. That is actually a good point, though. What are you guys looking forward to for the future? What is coming down the pike that you're excited about?
Oh, geez, all kinds of stuff. I think the ones that I'm most excited, obviously Everest is huge for us. Bringing sort of database as a service, giving you control, giving you sort of the best of both worlds, the AWS experience, but also control of the data and the systems underneath it. And then one of the other big exciting ones is our Postgres team is working on transparent data encryption, which is something that we're really excited about. I know there are multiple solutions out there, but we think we're looking at a slightly different approach to the same problem, and hopefully, the early returns are that the community does see value in it. So I think that's always great for us to keep on going when we hear things like that.
Yeah. Transparent data encryption being like the database itself automatically does encryption and then it's encrypted at rest.
It's actually stored encrypted in the database, so it doesn't matter. I mean, it's actually double encryption if you encrypt at rest, meaning the disk itself is encrypted, but this is encrypted inside the database. So even at runtime, you don't have to worry about your data being exposed unless you are the application that was intending to see the data.
Very cool.
So it's being encrypted in real time as it's being read and written to the database.
Excellent. Lori, did you have anything you wanted to plug for the future? Anything you're super excited about that's coming down the pike for Percona?
Well, as a community person, I'm going to jump on what Steve just said, right? And like we're going to a bunch of conferences. Conference season is back, so I am very happy to be able to be at events representing Percona. So we'll be at Open Source Summit Europe. We're staying for Valky Day. We'll be at All Things Open. We'll be at PGConf in New York. We'll also be at OSFF, which is Finos's conference in New York. We're going to be at KubeCon. So to be able to take everything that we just talked about today and then put it into practice, like in person, is what I'm super jazzed about. So like to see what the reaction from the PG Postgres community is when we sort of have our presentations about TDE, to get their feedback in person, to launch Everest at Open Source Summit Europe, right? To see like what questions people are asking, to see how we can then react as a community. Like, what do we have? Do we need documentation? Do we need this? Do we need that? This is where I get super jazzed, because it helps set the stage for what we do in the spring, right? So with community, everything you do is like a couple months in advance, right? So being in person at like 6 conferences in like 3 months or something crazy, and then be able to take all that knowledge back to the engineering team and then package ourselves up for the spring round, right? KubeCon in the spring, Open Source Summit in the spring, all of those other things is the fun time. So I'm well rested from the summer, and now I'm ready to get back on the road.
Excellent. Busy. All right, so I have to ask you guys each before I let you go. These are our required 2 questions. We'll start with Lori. What's your favorite text editor and scripting language?
I'm sorry, did you see the face I just made? What? I'm going to pass.
So is it Microsoft Word and English? We get
I'm
that
not gonna
sometimes.
lie. Then I will say that. I was not expecting this question. Catherine did not prep me for the standard questions. I've got nothing. I got a little egg on my face. That's fine. Vim, 100%. Vim.
No, that's fine, and that's something. Most of the people have an answer, but every once in a while somebody doesn't. I think the really fun one is when someone's been in management for a while too, and they're like, let me think back to what I used to use back when I actually wrote code. So that's fine. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But Steve, same 2 questions. I imagine you'll have a little bit different answer.
Well, definitely Vim is my favorite editor. Although this Copilot thing, I'm digging. So I use VS Code a lot more for like an IDE. But my old go-to, quick and dirty, just Vim file, and I could be 1,000 times faster navigating the file there than in anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And scripting language?
Bash is my go-to. Python if it's going to get longer and more involved, but Bash, if I could type it on the command line, it's just easier for me.
That's great. I'm waiting for someone to tell me one of the esoteric extensions on something like Bash or Python. So somebody that uses Amber instead of Bash as their main scripting language. Or I was recently introduced to Python, which is Python with braces, and some fun stuff out there like that.
I work with a guy who is all about Z Shell. Everything was Z Shell.
That's great.
I'm lost in that.
fun. All right. Thank you both so much for being here. It was a blast. Really, really appreciate it. And that's Lori Lorusso and Steve Hoffman. Thank you guys both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. All right. Well, that is the show today. And as I'm sure you noticed, databases are not my area of expertise, but we sort of hung in there. We faked it for part of the way, but had a really good conversation about community as well as some technical things and a bit of database stuff, and was really, really a blast. We've got something really cool coming up next week. We are talking with Andreas about Ladybird, which is a browser, but it's not one of the big browsers. It's a new browser, sort of written from the ground up, which is really interesting. So make sure and tune back in next week for that. Do you want to follow me? There is, of course, Hackaday. I've got my security column goes live every Friday, and that's also the home of Floss Weekly, as you probably know. There's also the Untitled Linux show over at twit.tv still, and make sure and tune in for that. We sure appreciate everybody that's here, both to get us live and on the download, and we will see you next week on Floss Weekly.